Chief Hammond, we need to discuss equipment assigned to your unit.
Equipment moves through this place every day. That's nothing unusual.
The items were requisitioned but never entered
You
inventory.
don't understand the operational demands we were dealing with.
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Christopher Hammond did this across 4 years and nearly 200 items, and left a paper trail for every single one. The warrant officers behind this camera are here to collect.
We're talking about equipment worth millions of
People
dollars.
sitting behind desks always think supply work is simple until they're the ones responsible for it.
He would not get the chance to retire in style. Within 72 hours of that supplier picking up the phone, federal agents would walk into his house in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and inventory what he had built over 4 years inside the supply chain of the 3rd Special Forces Group. 98 firearms, more than 90 military-issue spotting scopes, night vision goggles, all-terrain vehicles, over $100,000 in cash sitting in his home, a $2 million private armory assembled out of equipment the United States Army had purchased to put in the hands of Green Berets. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. How much trust would you put in one person to control over $2 million worth of military equipment with almost no one looking over their shoulder? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We cover cases like this every single week, and the people who get caught are almost always the ones nobody thought to check on. Christopher Hammond was born in 1986 in a working-class neighborhood outside Norfolk, Virginia, the son of a Navy machinist's mate and a county clerk who worked second shift at the Chesapeake Municipal Building. The Hammond House on Bowers Hill Road was a 1,400-square-foot rancher with a chain-link fence around the backyard and a 1992 Chevy S10 in the driveway. The walls of the den were covered in framed photographs of his father in dungarees aboard the USS Yorktown. By the time Christopher was 12, his father had retired from the Navy and taken a job as a foreman at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. The family moved to Portsmouth, and Christopher enrolled at IC Norcom High School. His 10th grade English teacher would later remember him as quiet, polite, and uncommonly good at making the other kids think he was in charge. His junior ROTC instructor, a retired Army First Sergeant named Roland Pickett, evaluated him as a natural non-commissioned officer in waiting who understood logistics and personnel before he understood himself. He graduated in 2004 with a 3.4 GPA and enlisted in the United States Army the same week. He shipped to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for basic combat training in August. His drill sergeants noted that he asked too many questions during property accountability formations and showed unusual interest in the Connex inventory process. It was filed as a positive observation. The Army needed soldiers who understood the paperwork. Hammond completed advanced individual training as a 92Y unit supply specialist at Fort Lee, Virginia. The 92Y is the soldier responsible for the receipt, storage, issue, and accountability of all property belonging to a U.S. Army unit. The 92Y signs for the equipment. The 92Y signs it out. The 92Y is, in the Army's own institutional language, the single point of accountability for everything from a Kevlar helmet to a Bradley fighting vehicle. He arrived at his first duty station, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in March 2005. He was 20 years old. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, and within 7 months he deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He spent 15 months running a supply room out of a converted shipping container in Tal Afar, signing for sensitive items in conditions where the institutional checks of garrison life simply did not apply. He came home a sergeant. He met Heather Reeves, a 23-year-old Army officer candidate, at a wedding in Clarksville, Tennessee in 2008. She was already on the officer track, ROTC, at the University of Tennessee, on her way to a commission as a second lieutenant in the Adjutant General Corps. They married in 2010 at a courthouse in Montgomery County. There were 6 people present. Over the next decade, the Hammonds moved with the Army. Fort Campbell, Fort Drum, New York, a brief tour at Fort Polk, Louisiana. He was selected for the Warrant Officer Candidate School at Fort Rucker, Alabama in 2014. The Warrant Officer track in the Army is, by design, a technical career path for soldiers who already know their craft. The Army does not put generalists in warrant officer slots. It puts the best specialists in the force into warrant officer slots and gives them broader authority over the systems they already understand. He was promoted to Warrant Officer 1 in 2015, Chief Warrant Officer 2 in 2017, Chief Warrant Officer 3 in 2020. By the time he and Heather arrived at Fort Bragg in 2019, he was 33 years old, 16 years into his career, and considered one of the most competent property and procurement warrant officers in the special operations community. His evaluations from that period read like a recruiting brochure. Demonstrates mastery of supply chain operations across SOF unique procurement channels. Trusted with the most sensitive accountability functions in the Group Support Battalion. A model warrant officer whose attention to detail and personal integrity set the standard for the formation. His commander wrote, in the spring of 2021, that Hammond was an officer this Army cannot afford to lose. The 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, is the Special Forces unit responsible for operations across Africa. Its Green Berets carry equipment that does not exist in conventional Army units. Variable power day optics on M4 carbines. Suppressors machined for specific weapons platforms. Image-intensifying night vision and thermal fusion goggles. Tools and accessories purchased through special operations procurement channels that bypass the standard Army acquisition system because they have to. The operational tempo demands it. The man the Group Support Battalion put in charge of buying that equipment, signing for it, and tracking it into the unit was Chief Warrant Officer 3, Christopher Hammond. To understand what Christopher Hammond did, you have to understand how the United States Army buys equipment for its Special Forces units and why that system is structured the way it is. The 3rd Special Forces Group is one of 7 active-duty Special Forces groups in the United States Army. Each group is organized into operational detachments, headquarters elements, and a support battalion. The Group Support Battalion is the logistics, intelligence, communications, and medical backbone of the group. Without the Group Support Battalion, the operational detachment alphas, the 12-man teams the public knows as the Green Berets, cannot deploy, cannot eat, cannot shoot, and cannot communicate. Inside that Group Support Battalion, a small number of warrant officers hold what the Army calls Broad Procurement Authority for Special Operations Peculiar Equipment, or SOP. The acronym matters. SOP refers to gear that is specifically authorized for Special Operations units and not for the conventional Army. Suppressed upper receivers, variable power LPVO scopes, thermal imagers, Polaris MRZR all-terrain vehicles built for desert insertion, night vision systems running tens of thousands of dollars per unit. The reason that procurement authority is structured the way it is comes down to operational tempo. A conventional Army unit can run its supply requests through a months-long acquisition cycle. A Special Forces ODA preparing to deploy to a counterterrorism mission in West Africa cannot. The warrant officer in the Group Support Battalion has to be able to identify a requirement, requisition it through SOF unique channels, and put it in a team room locker before the team manifests at Pope Field. That speed costs you institutional friction. The warrant officer's requisitions are not subjected to the same multi-layer signature chain that a conventional unit purchase would be. The justification is, by Army standards, light. The warrant officer signs a document saying the unit needs the item. The supplier ships the item to the unit. The warrant officer is then responsible for logging that item into the unit's property book. The property book is the master ledger of every piece of equipment a unit owns. It is supposed to be reconciled regularly. A hand receipt is supposed to be issued every time an item is signed out to a soldier. An inventory is supposed to be conducted every time a commander changes. The Army has designed an inventory architecture that, on paper, makes it nearly impossible for sensitive items to disappear. In practice, the system has one structural vulnerability, and Hammond understood it precisely. The warrant officer who requisitions the item is also the warrant officer who is supposed to log it. If he never logs it, the property book does not show a discrepancy. There is no missing item, because the item was never recorded as having arrived. The supplier shipped it. The Army paid for it. But inside the unit's own accountability infrastructure, the item simply does not exist. The check on that vulnerability is supposed to be the periodic Inspector General audit and the annual unit-level command supply discipline evaluation. Both of those mechanisms compare what the unit has against what the unit is supposed to have. Neither of them, by design, compares what the unit ordered against what the supplier shipped. That cross-reference happens only if someone outside the Army initiates it. For 4 years, no one did. The scheme began modestly. The earliest verified transactions in the case file are from 2019, when Hammond was newly assigned to the Group Support Battalion and still feeling out the boundaries of his authority. The first items he diverted were small: a Trijicon ACOG scope here, a set of Magpul handguards there, items priced in the low 4 figures that, individually, would not raise an eyebrow on any requisition. He learned quickly. By the spring of 2020, the operation had a rhythm. Hammond would identify a piece of equipment that the unit could plausibly need. He would draft the requisition through the SOF unique procurement channel. The supplier would ship the item to a Fort Bragg receiving point. Hammond, as the warrant officer responsible for property accountability, would sign for the shipment. The item would then never reach the unit's arms room, optics locker, or vehicle bay. It would go, instead, into the cargo bed of his personal Chevrolet Silverado, and from there to his home garage on a residential street in Cumberland County. The buyers came through gun shows, online forums, and word of mouth. The special operations community is small. Former Green Berets and contractors at private security firms knew that the gear they wanted, the variable power LPVOs, the suppressors, the L3 PVS-31A binocular night vision devices, was hard to come by on the civilian market. Some of it was outright restricted. All of it was expensive. Hammond was suddenly a man who could supply it. Wire transfers started arriving in bank accounts controlled by Christopher and Heather Hammond. $12,000 from a buyer in Tampa for a pair of spotting scopes. $47,000 from a Texas-based outfit for a crate of accessories. $83,000 for a Polaris MRZR D4, stripped of its Army markings and listed in the bill of sale as private off-road vehicle, used. Across the focused 2-year conduct window between 2020 and 2022, the deposits added up to at least $1.8 million. Hammond was careful about the lifestyle. He did not buy a Lamborghini. He did not move to a gated community in Pinehurst. The Hammonds upgraded inside the lines a federal investigator's eye would not naturally land on. A larger, but not enormous house, a base boat, a second truck, a vacation property in the mountains of western North Carolina. The dollar amounts on those purchases were defensible against a major's salary and a chief warrant officer's pay, especially when paired with Heather's officer pay grade. Major Heather Hammond, by 2021, was at the 04 pay grade with 13 years of commissioned service. A combined household income on paper of roughly $220,000 a year was enough to explain a lot. But the cash was the problem. Buyers in the secondary market for special operations gear do not always want a paper trail. Some of the payments came in cash. Hammond accumulated those bills in his home. By the time federal agents would walk through his front door, the cash on hand exceeded $100,000. The unit, meanwhile, registered no alarm. Hammond's requisitions cleared the SOF unique procurement chain because his justifications were technically accurate. The 3rd Special Forces Group did, in fact, have an operational need for variable power optics, night vision systems, and ATVs. The unit was actively deploying to the African continent. The fact that some of the items requisitioned never reached the operational teams was, in the unit's day-to-day reality, invisible. The teams had what they needed. They were not aware they should have had more. In 2021, Hammond ordered an ATV that was, on paper, destined for an ODA preparing to deploy to Mali. The ATV was shipped to Fort Bragg. The ATV was signed for by Hammond. The ATV never reached the ODA. The team deployed without it, using a different vehicle that was already in the motor pool. They never asked where the new one went. They had bigger problems. Hammond's wife, Major Heather Hammond, served in an adjutant general role. a personnel and administration officer. The federal indictment alleged that she was aware of the source of the funds, that she helped manage the bank accounts where the proceeds were deposited, and that she participated in the disposition of the equipment. She was charged alongside her husband when the case was finally indicted. By the late summer of 2022, the Hammonds had, in their own private inventory, around 200 items that the United States Army had paid for, and was, in the strict accounting sense, missing without knowing it. It did not break through an audit. It did not break through an Inspector General review. It did not break through a unit commander asking a question. It broke through a supplier, picking up a piece of equipment for warranty service and noticing something wrong with the return address. The exact identity of the supplier has not been made public, but the federal filings describe the mechanism in clear terms. A manufacturer of one of the high-end optics or accessories Hammond had been requisitioning ran a warranty service program. Customers who purchased the product could send it back to the manufacturer for repair or replacement under the warranty terms. Most of the customers who used that service were civilians or licensed dealers. The manufacturer's customer service team knew the names of those customers because they had a record of who had purchased the product. In the summer of 2022, a piece of equipment came in for warranty repair from a private individual. The individual was not on the manufacturer's customer list. He had not purchased the item from them. He had purchased it from a private seller. When the warranty service technician pulled the serial number on the unit, the manufacturer's internal records flagged the item as having been shipped under a U.S. government contract to the 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That should not have been possible. Government contracted equipment is not supposed to be in the secondary civilian market. There are statutes that prohibit it. There are regulations that prohibit it. There is, more practically, no legitimate civilian pathway for a piece of equipment to leave a Special Forces Group's logistics chain and turn up in a private individual's hands 18 months later. The supplier notified federal investigators. The notification went to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, the investigative arm of the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. DCIS, in coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's North Carolina Field Office, opened an investigation. The lead agents were Special Agent in Charge Christopher Dillard of the DCIS Mid-Atlantic Field Office and Special Agent in Charge Robert M. DeWitt of FBI North Carolina. The investigators began by pulling the serial number history of the item submitted for warranty service. They cross-referenced it against the procurement records of the 3rd Special Forces Group. The item had been requisitioned by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Christopher Hammond. The item had been delivered to Fort Bragg. The item had been signed for by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Christopher Hammond. The item had never been logged into the unit's property book. That was one item. Investigators then pulled every requisition Hammond had signed for over the prior 4 years. They cross-referenced each one against the unit's property book and the actual inventory in the unit's arms rooms and equipment lockers. The discrepancies were not subtle. Hundreds of items had been requisitioned, delivered, and signed for. A significant portion of them did not exist anywhere in the unit's accountable inventory. Investigators then pulled Hammond's personal banking records. The wire transfers told the rest of the story. We're heading into the federal investigation now. If you want to see exactly how the Department of Justice handles a case like this, when the defendant has a security clearance, an officer's commission, and 20 years of Army service behind him, subscribe. We cover these stories every single week, and the verdict in this one is not what most people expect. The federal search warrant for the Hammond residence in Cumberland County was executed in late 2022. The affidavit supporting the warrant ran more than 70 pages. It described the warranty repair flag. It described the requisition to inventory cross-reference. It described the wire transfers. It identified, by serial number, dozens of items investigators believed would be found inside the home. When agents entered the residence, what they found exceeded the affidavit's projections. In the garage, on shelving, the Hammonds had installed for storage. Agents recovered 98 firearms. Some were complete weapons. Some were upper and lower receivers. The serial numbers, where present, traced back to government procurement contracts. investigators photographed each weapon in place before bagging and tagging. On the floor of a back room of the house, agents recovered more than 90 military-issued spotting scopes, still in their factory packaging in many cases. Investigators counted them 3 times, and the count held at 90 plus. Each one represented a requisition Hammond had submitted to the SOF Unique Procurement Channel, an item the U.S. government had paid for, and an item that had been intended for a Green Beret who instead did without. Investigators recovered hundreds of military-issued firearm accessories: Magpul, Geisela, Daniel Defense. The accessories that, taken individually, look like the contents of any serious shooter's gun safe. Taken in this volume, in this house, with these serial numbers, they constituted evidence of a years-long systematic diversion. Agents recovered night vision goggles, L3 PVS-31As at roughly $12,000 per unit, PVS-14 monoculars, a thermal imager unit, electronic equipment associated with Special Operations Communications. The street value of the recovered items, calculated against the original government procurement cost, exceeded $2 million. And inside a safe in the master bedroom, agents recovered more than $100,000 in United States currency. The agents pulled the Hammonds' computers and phones. Forensic examiners worked through the contents. There were no encrypted ledgers, no spreadsheets titled "Stolen Weapons Buyers." Hammond was not that careless. But there were emails. There were text messages. A buyer in Florida, dated March 2221. Buyer: "You able to get the LPVO with the threaded mount? Same as last time." Hammond: "Yeah, give me 3 weeks. Wire goes to the usual." Buyer: "Roger." 6 months later, another exchange. The buyer this time was in Texas. Buyer: "What's the ceiling on PVS-31s this quarter?" Hammond: "2 pair I can move. After that, we wait." And a buyer in Arizona, dated June 2022, 2 months before the supplier's call. Buyer: "Brother, the unit you sent me last month came back glitching. I'm sending it in to the manufacturer under warranty. That cool?" Hammond: "Why are you asking me? It's yours." Buyer: "Just checking. Didn't want anything coming back on you." Hammond: "Nothing's coming back." That last exchange, recovered from the buyer's phone after federal investigators executed a separate warrant in Arizona, would become government's Exhibit 47 at trial. Hammond's confidence about nothing coming back on him was, in retrospect, the moment the case was decided, because that was the unit that came back on him. The investigators also began interviewing soldiers from the 3rd Special Forces Group. The interviews were careful. The agents needed to establish whether Hammond had operated alone or with Confederates inside the unit. The conclusion they reached was that Hammond had operated, at the unit level, essentially alone. He had used the structural authority of his position to bypass institutional checks that depended on someone other than him being the cross-reference. There was no one else inside the formation to flip. That left only the wife. Major Heather Hammond was interviewed under Title 10 authority and then under federal authority. She declined to make statements that incriminated her. The federal indictment alleged that she had known and participated. The first jury, in April 2023, agreed. The arrest of Christopher Hammond took place at the Hammond residence in Cumberland County on a Tuesday morning in late 2022. The body cam footage shows agents at the front door, identifying themselves, presenting the warrant. Hammond opens the door in a t-shirt and jeans. He is unarmed. His hands go up. He is taken into the living room. He is informed of his rights. He is asked whether he understands them. He says yes. The lead DCIS agent on the warrant team begins the interview at the dining room table. The conversation is recorded. Agent: "Sir, we're here today executing a federal search warrant on your residence. You understand the basis for that warrant?" Hammond: "I'd like to know what this is about." Agent: "Mr. Hammond, we've reviewed 4 years of procurement records out of Group Support Battalion. We've pulled the serial numbers on items you requisitioned and signed for. We have a cross-reference showing a substantial number of those items entered the secondary civilian market through transactions tied to bank accounts in your name and your wife's name. Hammond. I want to talk to an attorney before I say anything else. Agent. That's your right, sir. Before we end the interview, I just ask if there's anything on the property right now that we should know about for officer safety purposes. Firearms. Anything that's loaded. Hammond looks at the agent for a long moment. He says, "Most of what you're going to find is in the garage and the back bedroom. There's cash in the bedroom safe. The combination is my wedding anniversary." Agent. Thank you, sir. Hammond. I want an attorney. The interview ends. Hammond is escorted to a federal vehicle in the driveway. Neighbors are watching from across the street. Major Heather Hammond, who has been kept in a separate room with another agent, is also taken into custody. The body cam footage shows Hammond's face in the back of the vehicle. He is not crying. He is not panicking. He is doing math. The number he is doing math on is what the federal sentencing guidelines would calculate for $2 million in theft of government property, combined with wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. The math is bad. He says nothing on the drive to the field office. Those were the last words a federal investigator heard from Christopher Hammond before defense counsel was retained. The federal grand jury for the Eastern District of North Carolina indicted Christopher and Heather Hammond on multiple counts, including theft of government property, wire fraud, money laundering, mail fraud, and transportation of stolen goods. The case was assigned to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina. The first trial began in the spring of 2023. The government's case was built around the documentary evidence, the requisition records, the property book discrepancies, the wire transfers, the text messages, the warranty repair flag, the physical inventory recovered from the Hammond residence. The defense argued that Heather Hammond had been unaware of the source of the funds, that Christopher Hammond's conduct had not risen to the level alleged, and that the dollar valuations were overstated. In April 2023, the jury convicted both defendants on multiple counts. The conviction was a landmark moment in the prosecution of military insider theft cases at Fort Bragg. Then, in November 2023, the district court granted a new trial. The basis for the new trial order was a procedural issue with the first proceeding that the government did not contest. The case was reset. The second trial unfolded with a different result. Heather Hammond was acquitted by the jury. The evidence the second jury heard against her, considered fresh, did not satisfy the threshold for the offenses charged against her individually. Christopher Hammond, by contrast, was convicted of an additional count of money laundering and aiding and abetting. He had already, in the period between the trials, entered a guilty plea on 6 of the underlying charges. The new conviction stacked on top of that plea. The sentencing hearing took place on July 24, 2024, in the federal courthouse in Raleigh. Christopher Hammond stood before the court in a dark suit, his hair shorter than it had been in his Army photograph, his hands folded in front of him. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of North Carolina, Michael Easley, addressed the court. Hammond stole and then sold military scopes, weapons parts, tools, night vision goggles, and ATVs meant to support our troops in the fight for freedom, Easley said. Through his scheme, he had hoped to retire in style. Instead, he will be spending the next 3 years in prison. The court accepted the plea agreement and the jury conviction. It imposed a sentence of 36 months in federal prison. Restitution was set at $250,000. Forfeiture was set at $250,000, in addition to the property already seized. The 3-year sentence is on the lighter end of what the dollar magnitude of the conduct could have supported under the federal sentencing guidelines. The factors that weighed in Hammond's favor were the guilty plea on the underlying counts, the cooperation in the property recovery, the absence of prior criminal convictions, and 20 years of military service that included combat deployments. The factors that weighed against him were the duration of the conduct, the dollar value, the position of trust he occupied, and the operational impact of diverting equipment intended for special operations soldiers actively deployed. Christopher Hammond was remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He was designated to a low-security federal correctional institution in the southeastern United States. He is scheduled for release in 2027. He is not eligible to retain his commission, his warrant, his retirement, or the benefits that 20 years of Army service would otherwise have produced. The 3rd Special Forces Group has, since the case, reviewed and revised its property accountability procedures within the Group Support Battalion. The structural vulnerability Hammond exploited, the single point of accountability for both requisitioning and logging, has been split between 2 separate warrant officers in the current procedure. The supplier who placed the warranty repair phone call has not been publicly identified. This case was sobering. But the next case on your screen takes the betrayal of a Special Operations Command to a place that is somehow even harder to watch. Click it now.